Welcome back. This is Tuesday, February 23rd, 2016. Our guest in this segment is Will Smith. And Will, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We're going to start off by talking about the library, the public library.
Yeah, we're going to talk about consciousness again, as I usually do, but I'm going to lead into that because I've had an interesting experience in the past couple of weeks asking people. I have a library card at the Victoria Public Library, and any of my friends or acquaintances who have a card, I've been asking them if they know about the hoopla. It's called hoopla streaming of movies that you can do from the library. And I found people who know you can go to the library and rent a movie. You can, like you used to be able to do at one of the movie stores. But now you can stream, and so you go to the library, and I think you may have to have a relatively current card. So you may have to go back and get a newer card. And then when you go to this site, which is accessible from the Victoria Public Library site, and you go to this Hoopla, I think it's called hoopladigital.com, and they've got quite a selection of movies, and you can rent up to 12 a month. If I mean rent, you just borrow them free. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. So I thought that was pretty good.
So you can sit at home and watch. And I think you told me there was some pretty good movies.
Yeah. So that leads into last night we watched this movie called Orbs, and this is about these little orbs that show up in your pictures, in your photographs. And these people, it was just a movie, it was made just last year. And if you recall, the last time I was on the show, I talked about meeting a fellow in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was on vacation, and he told me he could see these things. And so he got me, and I could see something out of the corner of my eye. So we just thought, well, let's watch this movie. And sure enough, he talks a lot about that, and so that goes into this idea that I want to cover some more about discrete reality and how we can change our consciousness so that each of us is more tuned to what is actually happening around us. And so I've been noticing, I brought up that Greek poem by Sappho that I mentioned, where I felt like it took me somewhere, and I'm gonna play the music now in the background as we're doing this, because that's my latest thing. I've been really concentrating on that poem, and I memorized it, and then I came up with some music. And so to me, that's what I need to do, is I need to tell my subconscious that I'm interested in these little short, when you go down a rabbit hole or something happens. I mean, everybody has these things. I've talked to a number of people, and in fact, one of the guys on the show that we're working on, Steve Train at Farkle Garage, it's another show on Shaw, he's telling the story about how 40 years ago a friend of his had a basket of motorcycle parts under the stairs, and Steve said, I'd like to buy that if you ever want to sell it. And last year he called him 40 years later and sold it to him. And then the other thing is another friend of his in 1979 or something found a transmission in the garden, and when he was digging in his garden, and Steve said, I'll save that. So Steve got both of this motorcycle and this transmission, and the transmission happened to fit in the motorcycle. So in his discrete reality, he matched those two things, and it took 40 years for that reality to come together. But see, nobody else would have noticed that. So his consciousness is different from everybody else's, and I think that's a good example. And then I was talking about that here in the studio earlier with one of the other Shaw guys, Dan, and he said that happened to him last night. He was driving home and he was thinking about how it was raining, and the song Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head came on the radio. And that's an old song from the 60s, right? I mean, do you remember that song?
Oh, yeah.
And you remember who wrote it?
No.
Burt Bacharach. So he went home and he started listening to another show, and they started talking about Burt Bacharach and how he had written that song for Bob Dylan. Yeah. And Dan said, well, I hadn't heard about this for how many years? I don't know, but all of a sudden, here it is twice. So
it's these things coming together that connect.
Yeah, the point is that when my working model for this is that our reality around us is happening so fast that our subconscious kind of tunes stuff out. And because of our culture and the way we teach our kids in school and everything, we tune them into what everybody agrees that we all see. But there's some other things, and we can start telling our subconscious, because our subconscious is seeing all these things. And every once in a while, it throws something up just for a second and then throws it back down. So my idea is that we can all do experiments with this. We can just say, when those little things happen, like if you flash back to something that happened to you 40 years ago, just, you know, everybody has those little instantaneous things, or if two synchronistic things that you haven't thought about happen to you, two different people talk. So let's start thinking about that. Let's start going there a little bit. And like, I know I agreed with Dan that I'm going to, you know, we're going to talk about this stuff together and see what happens. So I'm going to go listen to that song. I'm going to listen to Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head and maybe do a little more research about it. Just kind of tell my subconscious, this is interesting stuff. Let's bring it out. You want to try doing that? Does that sound interesting to you? Maybe you can think about that as your life passes by.
So if I do that, what? Yeah. I mean, when you told the story of the guy and the motorcycle, I get that. And that same thing is, you know, similar things have happened to me, not over a 40-year. So
right.
What does it mean?
Well, I'm not claiming to know what it means. What I'm saying, though, is it's pretty interesting. It happens. Yes. What I'm saying is that this happens really all the time, and we always say the same thing. We go, isn't that amazing? What are the chances? What are the odds? But that's not, the odds are that it happens all the time, really. But what I'm saying is, let's not look at it and say that's a random occurrence in the universe. Let's say, hey, wait a minute, I'm tuned into something here that maybe everybody else isn't tuned into.
And if that's true, then there's something going on that's very different than what we think is going on.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's figure it out, because maybe that's what we need to do with each other, is find out, you know, that person, because that's really what we're doing on the show here. We're bringing things to attention that most people aren't paying attention to. You know, like, who's heard about that? You were talking about something that nobody's heard of, that you can look on search. It's not there. So that's what I'm saying, is let's just start talking about this type of thing. And I wanted to bring up one other movie that's on Hoopla that I watched, and it's called Otherworld. And I've talked about Otherworld before on the show. Otherworld is this guy's name is Freddie Silva. There are a few films out there called Otherworlds, so you have to make sure you're looking at the one by Freddie Silva. But this film, it's very recent also, and it talks about this type of thing, and these things about reality that we experience that are sort of anomalous and that happen to us, and we tend to not want to look at them.
Now, you were talking also about an experiment in consciousness.
Yeah, so what we're doing here is for example, so there are concrete results. That's what I'm showing you. Steve, in this case, got a motorcycle. His motorcycle, I don't know how much he paid for those things. He didn't pay anything for the transmission in the garden. I don't know how much he paid for the basket case motorcycle, but it probably wasn't much, and he's probably got a motorcycle that's worth over $10,000. So that's a very practical thing about this. And then for me, I went there, and now I have a song. And that music, to me, is an important thing. You'll hear the music. It's beautiful. To me, it's beautiful music. Well, actually, you did hear it. And so, to me, that's an important thing. I mean, I might have created something that wasn't as beautiful, or I might have created a song. Some of the songs that I've written are, you know, getting something negative out of my system. Whereas this is just a beautiful song. And the thing that's interesting about it also is this poet, Sappho. She lived several thousand years ago, and we don't have much of her poetry, but we have lots of writing from people, from other ancients, who've said her poetry is wonderful. So I'm tapping in here into something that may have been some kind of a knowledge field in the old days that was very popular. It would be like somebody in 2,000 years from now saying, you know what, I heard that old song, that 2,000-year-old song from that group called the Beatles back 2,000 years ago, and that did something to me. What happened there? So that's the kind of thing I want to access that field, see if anything else happens. What happens when you start? Because normally we just push it out. We just say, I don't want to deal with that. That's
well, you know. Speaking of changing consciousness, I had a bike accident, I guess about 3 years ago now.
I remember that.
Yeah, and because of that accident, I stopped riding my bike. And I started walking a lot more. And I happened to have the good luck to pass through a couple of very beautiful parks, and on an ongoing basis. They're not wilderness parks, but there's little bits of wild in them. There are little bits of wild in the park. with the animals and the birds that fit in there, and the insects and the moths. And that has changed it's made me realize the speed of nature has nothing to do with the speed at which humanity now moves. We are so far removed from the reality of the world we live in. So I thought that was a very interesting...
That's what I'm talking about. I mean, you've experienced a change of consciousness because you made a conscious decision, and now your consciousness of other things that are going on in the world around you has changed.
And I didn't make a conscious decision. I had to get hit by a bus to make that happen.
But still, that was still a conscious decision.
Which is funny in itself.
Because now, instead of being on the bus, which is not a place that one would typically think of as being beautiful, right? I mean, you would think of a bus as being kind of sterile or mechanical, or
often unpleasant.
You might find less than desirable odors. There are all sorts of other things that can happen. But you go out. I know I walk down that Harris Green, I think, and see little hawks and other birds, and it's nice to be in the green and around the trees. So yeah, that definitely changes the way you feel, right?
So, taking that the other way, I think our consciousness has been changed in a not so good direction by the creation of an industrial society that we all have to live in, especially the car, maybe. I mean, that is, anytime you're walking down the street, the cars are going by, they make the noise, they control the road, and they impact upon our consciousness all the time.
And it's relatively quiet here. I mean, there's some countries where people don't have to have mufflers, and so they don't. I mean, I've been in places where you just, at the end of the day, you've had enough.
Will, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody for watching this week's Citizens Forum.